Hi, I'm Jeff Dusting. Thanks for joining me today to hear me work through my presentation for the ITS Asia Pacific Conference 2021, although I think we were planning to run this in 2020. The presentation today is a summary of some work that we completed over the last 18 months, looking at the near future for tolling technology. The paper presents some of the research that are pulled together, looking at where we've been and out into the future, and then looks to draw that together to see whether we can lay out a roadmap to take Australia from its legacy tolling framework into something a little bit more modern. The way the presentation's been structured is by taking a look at payment and customer service technology, which has gone through some quite significant change over the past 10 to 20 years, and mobility payments are no exception. If you think about your Uber trip, if you still get out and about, it's charged by distance, time of day, and even mode. And internationally, we see tolling technology is a fast follower on the heels of some of these innovations. But in Australia, our tolling tech is locked to some extent quite far behind all of that. And I attribute a lot of that to the challenge with tolling technology being installed as part of secondary scope on our major civil works. Where the Civil Works program is focused, rightly so, on minimising risk, which results in selecting a successful prior technology and solution. And so without intervention, these commercial constraints leave Australia and Australian road tolling, perhaps controversially, in the dark ages, with a systemic perpetuation of those proprietary technologies that we put in place in the year 2000. So the paper looks to say, can we look at the technology industry trends, what government's doing from a transport and customer strategy perspective, and define a progressive tolling approach for our future infrastructure projects. The paper looks at a possible solution, addressing both technology and change to customer engagement, and provides a suggested transition roadmap. But before we get to the roadmap, we need a framework for that. And I just want to pause briefly, and I know on this presentation you're unlikely to be able to read the contents, but it's just to reinforce that the work and views presented here, though personal, are based on some very wide research where a lot of industry content has been pulled together to make the assertions made in the presentation today. So tolling as a system, depending on where you work, you may be focused on or understand tolling to be the stuff you see on the roadside, or the roadside technology, or as I would propose we call it in the future, the passage technology. It could be the software that determines the charge, or the relationship between the customer and billing, and so on. In this presentation, thinking about tolling in its broadest sense, considering all 6 of the elements illustrated on this slide. So having said that, I'd like to dwell a little more on the passage technology side of things, where in the past that's been referred to as roadside technology, and it's there that there's been, where if we redefine the trip identification or detection element of the tolling process, then we end up with some interesting trends that can be observed. So firstly, if we think about where we are today in the tolling world, first gen free flow tolling was the retirement of the toll booth. In rail, it's the move from a ticket collector to an Opal or a MyKey card for those in Victoria and New South Wales. And this is where most Australian toll roads are today. introduced in 2000 and still pretty much the solution we have today. We have seen more recently, and it's in some brownfield examples in Melbourne, the emergence of image-led solutions. So this is where we've moved from tag-dominated or an e-tag based solution supported by video for enforcement, becoming replaced with OCR-based solutions with tag as a supplement. And those solutions are crunching down on tolling performance, but they don't really, it's not a step change. This is an incremental improvement on where we were at the first generation. There has been some talk about video analytics being the future of tolling and road user charging, and a lot of media attention in the industry media around what I classify as third generation video stream technologies. This is where AI and sophisticated video analytics techniques are applied to multiple frames. So rather than relying on a triggered single image, these technologies use analytics to detect a traveller and merge the data from multiple sources to, from multiple frames to give its tolling output. There's a concern at the moment that this technology is not quite right for high volume motorways at this point in time, with performance still in the low 90% range. But I encourage people to continue to watch this space. Don't write this technology off yet. With video analytics moving into super resolution techniques, further development of neural algorithms, we'd expect to see some big leaps in performance there, but at the moment, the promise hasn't quite been realized. So if it's successful, we'll end up with a very cost-effective source of tolling data for motorways. But if we skip beyond a video-only solution, we end up with what I refer to as the fourth generation tolling solution. So again, this is a tolling specific solution still, but is based on multiple sensors and data sources, and potentially provides a framework for being gantry free. These solutions allow for high levels of video OCR, but license plate reading, thumbprinting, but also see the emergence of mobile devices and apps featuring in these tolling solutions. And I just pause briefly and talk to you about the tolling application market. So it's not a big thing in Australia, but there are a growing number of tolling applications in Europe and the US. As part of our research, we've identified and researched more than 12. And you could consider them to be one of two types. So there are the tolling applications that work to aggregate toll operations, so allowing the customer to have a single application and still drive on multiple different roads, so particularly in the US. And then there's the other class of applications that are coming at this from a mobility as a service perspective and moving into providing customers with tolling services and toll road operators as a toll collection service. And these range, it's not just the realm of startups. These applications are being developed by our established tolling providers as well. So in this context, you can possibly guess that there is room for a fifth generation. And it's in this fifth generation that we see mobility as a service and tolling merge together. So we've become mode independent with passage determination and mode in an application. And the roadside is reduced to enforcement and exception cases. And if you think about where we are with mobile applications at the moment, and the speed with which mobility as a service is developing, fifth generation tolling really isn't that far away, particularly in the cycle of infrastructure projects where our specifications are written 7+ years prior to commissioning of many of our new infrastructure projects. So hopefully you can see that the argument's building that we really should have our eye on fifth generation mobility technology. We shouldn't be focusing on all of the interim steps. And once we think about the importance of mobile applications, it prompts you to think a little more about what will the relationship with the customer be like at this time. And to help explore that idea, we have a model that effectively maps in the vertical axis what's the level of trust and transparency in the relationship between the toll road operator or toll collector, and what's on the horizontal axis, what's the level of engagement between the operator and the customer. And quadrant 1 is where toll road operations have traditionally started, at least. If you were to think of your relationship with your power utility, it's a transaction. You get your bill. You don't really have a high level of visibility as to how that bill's been derived, and you don't really need to talk to your power authority that often unless something goes wrong. And toll roads began in that quadrant. Certainly in the toll booth days, that's definitely where things were. But if we think about mobility as a service and the nature of the relationship those services have with their customer, they're clearly in quadrant 4. In that quadrant, there's a customer-driven ecosystem. Help is provided in social forums, and there's a high level of trust and transparency. Each of your trip is mapped in an app that you can trace through and see the direct connection between your travel and the costs incurred. There's a high level of transparency and a high level of engagement. The interesting thing is it's very hard for someone who has a customer relationship in quadrant 1 to move to quadrant 4. And of note, in Australia, Transport for New South Wales has seen this opportunity, and their single customer account and mobility platform clearly positions that state in quadrant 4. It's an interesting view because it is particularly difficult if you're a toll road operator and started in quadrant 4 to develop a strategy that doesn't turn you into a harvester and doesn't set you up in quadrant 3 either. You need to be in a position where you have a high level of engagement and trust. And that's certainly enabled through an app-driven strategy. So if we have an app-driven strategy, how do we make that step? Because toll revenue is sacred, and we can't just one day turn off our existing systems. So the proposed transition architecture is that our new assets are launched with to support mobile applications in the first instance. In that instance, if we establish a standard payment interface with the government mobility account, for example, then we open ourselves up to allow a marketplace of applications to participate, and a clear mechanism to do payment collection and revenue collection and distribution through to a concession holder, as is often the case. It does leave some questions for you though. It says, well, what about travellers who don't have an app, and things like, what do I do if the vehicle has more than one open app inside, and many others. And I do have answers for all of those, but in the time available, We'll just address a couple. In terms of non-app users and travelers, certainly video is a cost-effective way and offers the performance required to fill that void. So I'd certainly suggest that for our next few infrastructure projects, we may need to have a video plus application based tolling architecture so that we can manage that transition to mobile applications for tolling and mobility payments more generally. It does create a need for reconciliation, but on the other side, it also supports enforcement and our exception-based processes. I have retained this slide in my cull to try and keep this to time, because it's important to understand there is a myriad of possible combinations of passage detection, trip calculation, customer engagement models. And we plotted these as part of some other research to try to show what, on the vertical axis, the solution certainty, as in how likely is it, what's the risk, how far out into the future are these solutions? And on the horizontal axis, what's the relationship between revenue and cost? And when you think about the proliferation of mobile apps out in other markets, then it's understandable that we find the idea of a solution that's based on an open API or marketplace for government-sponsored tolling apps is certainly high on the solution certainty scale. And then when you map through the costs associated with that infrastructure, it's similarly not surprising to find that those solutions end up on the high revenue to cost ratio end of this spectrum. So you can see also on this chart that the traditional solutions such as toll booths and tag-based solutions sit at a similar level of solution certainty, but come in at a higher cost. So the analysis we've completed, the research that's been completed makes it clear that there's certainly a case for mobile applications being the tolling for the future. They allow for an integration with other travel modes, and for state operators, they allow and support the state operators to shift and encourage traffic onto modes that they want to encourage and away from those that they don't, with pricing signals and the like. They aggregate and make payment mechanisms much more simple for customers. And they remove, or at least in the transition phase, reduce the need for roadside infrastructure. From a customer management point of view, they take us closer to self-service and social service trends. So as a transition path, if we leverage the mature video analytics technologies, we can retire the tag, and we can use video tolling to migrate to a compliance as customers progressively migrate to app-based tolling. That's all I have for today. So thank you for the time you've invested in hearing me speak, and with luck, I'll get to see you presenting this in person at the conference soon. Thank you.